Dearly beloved, dearly beloved, we are gathered here no, we're not. First of all, can you hear me on the back? Should I scream? I'm good at screaming. Yes? Okay, good. Right. First of all, thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see this room almost full, and it's getting fuller by the minute. Our next plenary, it's an honor for me to present this plenary speaker for the second time. But I'm not going to do it. No, I refuse to do it. You expect me to do it in one of the two languages that you know. Okay, I'm sure most of you know English and some of you know Greek, right? Well, actually all of you know English and most of you will know Greek as well. We will do it in another language. So please say hello to my good friend George Hagis. You didn't do that for me, by the way. Okay, so George Hagis will introduce our next speaker, and I will try and translate.
Hello, everyone. Those of you who had joined us in Preveza, this might ring a bell or two.
Nah, no.
No? Okay.
Go to Preveza more.
After our plenary's latest interview in our newsletter, we discovered that all three of us are Trekkies. And therefore, with the help of Bing Translator, we have composed a welcoming speech in Klingon. So bear with us because we're just learning. So,
off we go.
Okay. Belod Echdun Battle Hill Dilbl Nuvpu Quasta Hivis Holqued Yotlch Achpotlch Wakun Nech Machje.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Wedge Hilvgihe Baklum Net Judge Chit Jatlch Op Kuji Ope Quidge.
it is with great honor and privilege we welcome one of the most important people in the field of linguistics.
Come on.
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. Actually, the first part, there were no actual words in Klingon for ladies and gentlemen, so we had to improvise. Okay? The rest of the text comes freer. Okay, so some say he drinks 3 cups of tea a day with cream, as we heard.
Actually, it's coffee.
Did I say cream? 3 cups of coffee a day with cream, may I add?
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. Wedge Hilvje Qua Vlnet Quadzits Judge Goch Gach Gasta Vis Taekwondo Awag Glyph.
Some say he has a black belt in Taekwondo based on the written exams, and that the person... Oh, sorry, that hasn't been said yet. Yes?
Wadzets Enuf Hochmom Facebook Quastavis Jogaga Gach Gach Machvad.
And that he envies, he's the person that envies most on Facebook, the person who envies most on Facebook is Lady Gaga.
Songach Tsequel Krashen.
To us, he is known as Dr. Krashen.
This is actually a very interesting symbol. Do you know where it comes from? It comes from the synagogue. Leonard Nimoy, may he rest in peace, got this from the synagogue. He went to the same synagogue as my uncle Boris, which is another story in Los Angeles. And this symbol comes from Yom Kippur, the most holy day of the Jewish religion, and a member of the priestly caste called a Kohen. Anyone whose last name is Cohn, probably is a Kohen, makes this sign in front of the Ark, in front of the Torah. So this is number one thing you should know about this. Number two, Leonard Nimoy is Jewish. Spock is Jewish. You may not know this, but in Judaism, the religions comes through the mother. It's matrilineal. And Spock's father, as you know, is Vulcan, but his mother came from a nice Jewish family in Boston. William Shatner is Jewish. And my daughter, who is also Jewish, says that for her, Star Trek is Jews in space. The other thing interesting about this, some of you can do this, some of you can't. My private hypothesis is that people who have studied piano can do this. Because you've learned to play double thirds and you can do this stuff. Okay, that's my speech today. Thank you. I'd like to begin also by departing another thing that was unplanned. I was inspired by the introduction. It was beautiful. I'd like to give you some of the newest research that we have from Southern California. And the research is not particularly useful to your students now. It will be useful, I'd say, in 40 to 50 years. And it's not useful to most of you looking out on you. You'll probably want to know about this in another 30 years. So please file this and retrieve it in about 30 years, then it's going to help. It's useful to me right now because it has to do with getting old. For some reason, I've been very interested in aging in the last few years. I've had some very interesting incidents. I was in the park just a few months ago playing with my grandchildren, and I was running around and very proud of myself for an old guy. And this man comes out to me. I still don't know what I should have said to him. He said to me, "Are these your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren?" I get senior discounts without asking. But I'll tell you one good thing that happened. This happened a few years ago at the Malibu gym. I was there with my daughter, and she was lifting weights, pumping iron, and my job was to take care of my newest granddaughter. I was holding my granddaughter while my daughter was working her lats and doing this. We were the only ones there until someone walked in. Adam Sandler walked in. Adam Sandler. He came up to me, and he said, "The best thing you can say to somebody my age," he said, "is this your child?" I said, "No, it's my granddaughter." So he gave me the equivalent of the hug among men, a little punch. And he said, "Good-looking grandpa." Adam Sandler is now my favorite Hollywood person. This is called the highest form of charity. Maimonides says this, when no one is looking. No reporters, no nothing. He's okay, all right? The part of aging I've been concerned with, and this is a good introduction to my topics today, has to do with senility, dementia. I used to quote Bill Cosby more. I still quote him. Bill Cosby had this great quote about dementia, and he said, "I'm not worried about dementia." He says, "When it comes, you won't know. Don't worry," okay? But I am concerned about it because it's in my family. Everyone on my father's side, on the Krashen side, all the Krashens got it, and they all got it at age 75. And for me, this is just around the corner, okay? My dad had it, his brothers and sisters, my aunt and uncles, they all got it. So there's something going on there. So the way I deal with my problems is I read the professional literature and I write an incomprehensible paper. This is, what I try to do. So I wrote a paper on dementia and how to avoid it. I looked at the research and I found there are 3 things you can do to delay the onset of dementia. Number 1, read. People my age who read for pleasure, not reading comprehension passages and answer the questions, okay? But really reading things you're interested in. People my age who read a lot have the same verbal memory as people in their 30s who don't read a lot. Pretty good. Number 2, be bilingual. This is Ellen Bialystok research from York University in Toronto. She was actually in the New York Times. She was interviewed about her research. It was a really, really good interview. Anyway, here's what they found. People who are bilingual have fewer problems with what is called executive control. Executive control means forgetting where you are, being distracted. What was I talking about? You go downstairs to get something, on the way you put something else away. You get to the room and you forgot why you went there in the first place. This happens to everybody. Don't worry. It happens to everybody all the time. It gets worse as you get older, but bilinguals who are used to switching languages, not so much. It's much less. Number 3, coffee. Is that wonderful or what? Yes. The research is clear, and it's come from different sources. So these laboratories agree, it triangulates. 3 cups a day of freshly brewed coffee will significantly delay dementia. Yes, about the same as these other factors. In fact, there's a little bit of research, and this is conjecture. They've done the research on mice, and they've extrapolated to humans. They're not sure yet if it's true. 5 cups a day might reverse Alzheimer's. Whoa. No, I have not looked at the research on decaffeinated coffee. I refuse. For me, decaf is like kissing your sister. It's okay, but it's really not the same. Okay? All right? Now notice you can do all 3 at once. You can read a book in another language, drink coffee at the same time, fountain of youth. Isn't that wonderful? By the way, I did write a paper on this. You can find it. It's on my website. And my website is, this is a commercial message. It's all free. SD, my middle name is David, sdkrashen.com. I'm putting more and more stuff on the website now. Everything should be free, in my opinion. Books and papers should all be free. Round of applause, please. Yes. Okay. Journals should be free. Okay? So there. My 1982 book, Principles in Practice, is available on my website for free. Don't ask me to do it. Don't ask permission. Download it. I'm scanning my old articles now and posting those a little bit at a time, okay? So it's up there. You can have a look at it. Now, what are we going to do today? First, I want to begin by summarizing the last 35 years of research in about 5 minutes, about 7 minutes, about 7 years every minute, so that reviews like this are interesting. If you already know about it, you don't need the review. And if you don't know about it, the review won't help you. It'll be too fast. So that's the purpose of reviews, and that's what I'm going to do. We are engaged in a very interesting war. The war is between 2 views of how we acquire language and how we develop literacy. And it's a good war because no matter who wins, we are learning a lot. The struggle is a healthy one. One point of view is what we call the Comprehension Hypothesis. This says we acquire language and we develop literacy by comprehension. Back in, 1975, Frank Smith's first book, amazing. The title was Comprehension and Learning, and the point was, they're the same thing. Is that brilliant or what? If you want to learn something, you have to understand it. Once you've understood it, you've learned it. That's it, folks. So in my case, comprehension and acquisition are the same thing. We acquire language when we understand what someone tells us and we understand what we read. We develop literacy by understanding what's on the page. As Kenneth Goodman has said, learning to read is natural. It's the same process. The interesting part of the comprehension hypothesis, a part I want to underline today and emphasize. First, you understand. You listen to a good story. You read a book. You have an interesting conversation. The result is grammar, vocabulary, writing style, all those things. Traditional instruction does it the other way around. We'll talk about that. So the result are the skills, right? The rival hypothesis is the skill-building hypothesis. The skill-building hypothesis says, first, learn your grammar. And the way you learn grammar is you consciously understand the rules. You produce language, you say it or you write it, and you try to make the rules automatic, and you get your errors corrected so you can change your idea of what the rule is. And you study your vocabulary cards and memorize vocabulary. And the idea is if you do this, someday you will be able to use the language. In other words, the comprehension hypothesis is a delayed gratification hypothesis. The gratification never comes. In my opinion, not a single person on this planet has ever mastered any significant amount of language through skill building. Notice, first of all, the cause-effect is different. I'm going to say this again and again. Comprehension hypothesis, you hear stories, you have conversations, the result of the skills. Skill building, first you learn the skills. Remember the English class you took in school. And then you practice them, and then you can eventually use the language. Number two, skill building is not very pleasant. For most members of the human race, 98%, it is difficult and boring. The 2% who like it become language teachers. And linguists, people like me, and some of you, okay? The comprehension hypothesis, the language acquisition, literacy development process are interesting and fun, otherwise you won't do it. It was pointed out by Leonard Newmark years ago that input has to be interesting, otherwise people will not pay attention to it. So it has to, so comprehension hypothesis is win-win. It's pleasant and it works. The skill building hypothesis is lose-lose. It's painful and it doesn't work. Unfortunately for many people, the skill building hypothesis is not a hypothesis, it's an axiom. Most people are unaware that there is an alternative. If you believe in the skill building hypothesis, then all the testing going on worldwide, which is getting worse every day, makes perfect sense. It's all based on skill building. Well, the part of, it's a funny temperature in the room today. It's a little too warm to keep your sweater on, right? But if you take it off, you're a little too cold. So I'll be doing this, going back and forth as we proceed. I take out my multicolored pens. Not to be distracting. Okay. The part of the skill building hypothesis the comprehension hypothesis that I want to emphasize today is the reading hypothesis. And that says that most of our literacy comes from reading, and it's a certain kind of reading that really counts. Reading because you want to. Free voluntary reading, the kind of reading you did last night before you went to sleep. How many of you read last night before you went to sleep? How many of you, like me, read last night even though it was very late? Do you know what I read? A Star Trek novel translated into Spanish. This is the way to do it, man. It's great, okay? I know the plot, I know the characters, it's really fun. The theory says, the hypothesis that free voluntary reading is the source of our vocabulary, our reading comprehension, our ability to write with a reasonable writing style, Most of our spelling ability, not quite all of it, but most of it, our ability to handle complex grammatical constructions, and a great deal of our vocabulary comes from free voluntary reading. I'll briefly mention the research. 3 areas of research: reading in school, sustained silent reading time. SSR. Some of us remember in the States we used to call it USSR. It's true. Uninterrupted, sustained silent reading. It's true. Anyway, in SSR, you take a few minutes out of the day. The children read. They read whatever they want to read, and within reason. No book reports, no questions at the end of the chapter. And the teacher gets to read whatever the teacher wants to read for 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day. We've got to find out if this works. I have calculated if you do sustained silent reading 10 minutes a day with only one class, over a normal teaching career, this amounts to 3 months paid vacation. How about that? I have spent a lot of time looking at the research on this since the last 20 years, 30 years now. Oh gosh, it's a sign of getting old. And here's what I've concluded. The studies are set up like this. One group does sustained silent reading. The other group does skill building, basically. And you see which group does better on reading comprehension tests, vocabulary tests, which group makes the better gains. The most negative result is no difference. First language and second language, very clear research results. They make the same gains. So which is easier on the teacher? Doing drills and exercises or sitting back and reading for pleasure? Reading for pleasure. Which is easier for the students? Reading for pleasure. So if there's no difference, which one are we going to do? Also, we get so many more things when we read than when we do skill building. The studies that show no difference, in every case I've looked at, are short-term studies. Some as short as 10 weeks, 2 months. Now, I've seen these programs, and 2 weeks, 10 months, my goodness, the kids haven't even found a book yet. You give a chance to run, it's consistently positive. The readers do significantly better. This is a very stable result. So that's one, free reading programs. Number 2, what we call multivariate correlational programs. The best one just came out last year from the University of London. Sullivan and Brown are the authors, and I've looked at this very carefully. It's great. The last version of it, this is a study where they've been looking at people since they were very, very young and giving them tests every few years and charting it. Now they've looked at them when they're 42 years old. The ones, native speakers of English, the ones with the best vocabularies, yes, the ones who read more when they were younger, yes, the ones who come from a higher social class, yes, but also the ones who are reading now, independent of how much they read when they were younger. The ones who read more at age 42 are better, and it doesn't matter how much they read when they were younger. It doesn't matter what their parents' social class was. It doesn't matter how much education. It's how much you read that counts. And guess what? Fiction counts. Yeah, how about that? It's not just reading all these technical things that the experts say you should be reading nonfiction and all that. No, it's fiction that counts and really helps. So these are the correlational studies. And there are also case histories. I love case histories. The important thing about case histories, though, researchers out there, you got to look at a lot of them. If you just look at one, you won't see the commonalities. You know, my brother-in-law acquired 4 languages and he loves grammar. Yeah, but he also did a lot of reading, probably got a lot of input. So you look at a lot of them. I'll give you a few case histories, one in first language, one in second language, and I'll add more to it. One of my favorites was a book that came out a couple of years ago and became a made-for-TV movie. It was the story of a woman called Elizabeth Murray, who told her story. First language story. Grew up in total poverty in New York. Kids in poverty don't do very well in school, as you know. And in addition to the problem with health and diet and all these things overwhelming, they don't have access to books. The ones who succeed are the ones who find some access to books, and that's what happened to Liz Murray. They grew up in the New York area, she and her dad and her family, and her dad had a very interesting habit. In those days, the New York City public libraries were not connected electronically. Each library was its own kingdom. Her dad would get a library card from a local library, would take out as many books as he could, and never return them. And then he would go to the next local library, get a library card, take out all the books he could, and never return them. So the house was filled with fugitive library books from all over the city. Liz said that's what did it. All she did was go to school just for the last few weeks so she would know what was on the examination. And it was her reading that actually allowed her, she said, to squeak by from grade to grade. We see a lot of stories like this. Another story has to do with comic books. Comic books have had a bad reputation for many years. And the problem was a book written in the 1950s in the United States by a psychiatrist, Dr. Frederick Wertham, with a German name, so he must be right, okay? Sounds very impressive. Dr. Wertham wrote this book called Seduction of the Innocent. And in this book he said, comic books are the source of juvenile delinquency. Now Wertham hadn't the slightest idea of experimental methodology. He didn't have the first week of the class, you know. His logic was like this: a little boy gets in trouble with the police, they go to his bedroom, what do they find? Comic books. Well, this was the golden age of comics. 90% of boys and most girls were reading comics in the 1940s when he did the study. It's like saying they go to the bathroom, they find a toothbrush. Toothbrush must be a source of crime, okay? Anyway, he testified in Congress, and the legislatures government officials, when you mention numbers and statistics, they always get weak in the knees. They don't quite understand it. And they bought all this stuff, and we had the comic book code, which made it very hard to write anything interesting in comic books. Marvel Comics, the leader of the field, got revenge. Today in Marvel, every few years, there's a new supervillain named Dr. Frederick Wertham. Isn't that cool? Well, if you think comics are bad for you, consider the case of one of the noblest people on the planet, Bishop Desmond Tutu, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. He says, one of the reasons I acquired English so well and developed a love of English books and reading was comics. My father brought home comic books, and this is what did it for me. Well, I've just given you the preliminaries. This is the case for the comprehension hypothesis and the case for reading. I'd like now to extend this. I'd like to say it's not just comprehensible input, and it's not just interesting comprehensible input. I'd like to introduce a new vocabulary word. By the way, one of the secrets to success, you want to be like me? You be like famous and give talks, you know, people quote you all the time. I'll tell you the secret. Invent new terminology. This is it. Natural order hypothesis. Monitor. Comprehensible input. Yeah. I did not invent the affective filter. Dulé and Burt did, but I get credit for it anyway. Okay. Doesn't matter. And try to make it so it's not quite comprehensible. So people don't quite understand it and they think you're a lot smarter than they are. I did this with I+1. No one has any idea what I was talking about. Oh, that must be very profound. Okay. So you got to keep coming up with new things, kind of like Madonna. You have to keep, you know, reinventing yourself. So my new terminology today, remember you got this from me, even though as you'll see, I stole the whole idea from someone else. Compelling comprehensible input. We want comprehensible input to be more than interesting. The best comprehensible input is so interesting that you're not even aware that it's in another language. Your focus is on the message. This is the best input for language acquisition. Those of you who've studied a little psychology will know that I took this entirely from Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote a wonderful book called Flow, F-L-O-W. Notice I'm spelling that, but not his name, okay? And the concept of flow is identical to what I'm talking about. It says the input is so interesting, the activity is so interesting, you forget yourself. Your sense of self diminishes. Your sense of time diminishes. Only the activity counts. This is what we want. We want input to be exciting. I'll tell you how I started thinking about this. And it was just a few years ago. And it was because of a former student, who now a colleague, Christy Lau, L-A-O, who is, got her degree from me in the 90s. And we're still collaborating, as I am with lots of former students. It's really great. She lives in the San Francisco area, and she runs, in addition to being a professor at San Francisco State University, she has a summer Mandarin enrichment program. This is designed for children who have come from China, from Mandarin-speaking areas, who are losing their Mandarin. English is taking over, middle school age, 8, 9, 10 years old. The program is really good. Lots of books and activities and fun. There was one child who didn't care. He didn't want to be there. His name was Jack, Mandarin speaker at 8 years old at the time, and Mandarin was beginning to go, okay? And English was taking over. So Christy met with him, and they made a deal. She said, okay, Jack, you can drop out, but here's a book. Take this with you. You might like it. Please have a look. I said, fine, I'll look at it. The Stories of Afanti, very well known in the entire Chinese-speaking world, the Cantonese-speaking world, Mandarin-speaking world, etc. He looked at it and actually liked it. He thought these were good. He asked his mom to read him the stories. They were a little bit too hard for him because of the written language. Mom started reading him the stories. First it was one story, then two, then he was insisting on 3, 4, 5 a day. Finally, Mom and Jack made a deal. She would read him the stories while he did the dishes. That's how much he liked them. As long as they had these stories, his Mandarin started to improve. Here's the point. At no time did Jack care about Mandarin. He cared about the stories. That was the breakthrough. Another case, also from Christy, in our paper that we published on this case, we call the young man Paul, but I'll tell you his real name. He's Christy's son. His name is Vincent. I know Vincent. He's a nice teenage kid in San Francisco area. And he's bilingual Cantonese English. The home language is Cantonese. Christy and her husband are both Cantonese speakers, and her parents lived with them for a long time. And both parents are Cantonese speakers. The parents and the grandkids, of course, got along very well, all in Cantonese. So Vincent grew up bilingual Cantonese English and very comfortable in both. When Christy and her husband, when the kids were younger, Christy and her husband, could you pour me a glass of water? Thanks. Christy and her husband were working very hard, and they had to hire a babysitter occasionally. And the babysitter they hired was Chinese, and she would turn on TV. Thank you. Cheers. She would turn on TV and turn on Mandarin cartoons. Now, Cantonese and Mandarin are not the same language. They are not even dialects. They're really different languages. It's kind of like Spanish and Italian, or I'd say Spanish and Romanian. They have similar vocabulary. There's the same root for the languages, but knowing one does not guarantee you're going to understand the other by a long shot. It's a help, but it doesn't guarantee it. So he started to watch the cartoons, and with the help of the friendly caretaker, with the help of the fascinating cartoons, I love children's cartoons. I think they're amazing. I still watch SpongeBob. We saw the SpongeBob movie a couple of weeks ago. It was wonderful. The newest one that I like, especially if you get that here, is called Regular Show. Check it out. Anyway, so he would watch these cartoons. With the action of the cartoon, his knowledge of Cantonese and the caretaker's help, he was understanding a fair amount, and the same ones would come on again and again. After the cartoons, after months of cartoons, he moved on to children's shows, and as he grew older, children's TV in Mandarin, and gradually adult shows. And, you know, swordsman adventures and things like that. Dad would bring home a couple of Mandarin movies every weekend, and he and his boys would watch them. In the evening, Vincent and his grandparents and his brother would watch the news in Mandarin. Today, Vincent speaks Mandarin pretty well. When Mandarin guests come over, Mandarin speaking guests, Christy says he's fine, he's comfortable, he interacts, no problem. When they go to China in Mandarin speaking areas, when they go to Taiwan, he interacts very comfortably, no problem. Like Jack, Vincent doesn't care about Mandarin. He is not motivated to learn Mandarin. He doesn't care one way or the other. What these boys have taught me is that very few people are interested in language. Very few people care about language. Only crazy people like us. We are members of a lunatic fringe. Today I announce the end of the concept of motivation to learn a language. You should really learn English. It's going to be good for you. Kids don't care about that. You tell them a good story, though, and they're with you. It's the story that counts. And the inevitable result is language acquisition. No more get motivated, learn this language, it's going to be good for you someday. Not at all. Most people are not like us. I'd like to add one more case, and this is English as a first language. And it comes from the work of a woman named Rosalie Fink, and I've written down a quote from her stuff. She wrote some amazing articles, one of which came out, journal with a really weird name, the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. Who can remember that? They used to call it the Journal of Reading. I thought that was a lot better. Anyway, she published this paper in 1996 that looked at first language dyslexics. Grown-ups who, when they were younger, were diagnosed as dyslexic. All were successful. 12 people, 10 had published articles. They were that literate. One was a Nobel Prize winner. The entire group learned to read very late. Most of them learned to read when they were 10 years old. One of them didn't learn to read until he was in the 12th grade. Here's how they did it. Great quote. All of them each had a passionate personal interest, a burning desire to know more that required reading voraciously, seeking and reading everything they could get their hands on about a single intriguing topic. That none of them were interested in learning to read. They were interested in the topic. Again, the same idea. They got compelling, comprehensible input where they were forgetting what the medium was. They were only concerned with the message. There's no such thing as you should learn to read. It's going to be good for you. So I announce the end of motivation to become literate. Give people a good story or something they really want to know about. Well, that's my introduction to the concept of compelling, but that's not enough. I have to introduce more new terminology and new hypotheses every couple of years, and dramatic statements. Here's a dramatic statement. I want to talk about academic language in the few minutes remaining. We've been told our students need more than conversational language. They need academic language. English, of course, is the language of the international middle class. It's the language of business, the language of science, the language of aviation, a two-edged sword, as I'm sure you will all agree. It's great that Greece can talk to Korea in English, of course. It's wonderful. We all worry about what's happening to native languages. We all worry about the power of killer languages, how they gradually get rid of other languages, first language literatures, etc. But we do want academic language in any language, in our home language and in English. The traditional way is to do English for academic purposes. My claim is that it has never worked, ever. So I'm pronouncing the end of English for academic purposes. Okay? And I'm going to make a dramatic statement. There's only one way to get it, and it's through compelling, comprehensible input. And I'm going to say today there are 3 stages. The first stage, first language and second language, stories, of course. When you're in school, hearing stories from the teacher. When you're at home, mommy and daddy telling you stories. Second language classes, second language methods that involve stories. Today's new vocabulary, TPRS. Write it down, Google it. It's a wonderful teaching method, beyond natural approach in my opinion, even better. TPRS, in where students and teachers co-create stories together in which the students are the characters. How about that? Wonderful method. Good research, etc. The middle stage, what stories give you, as most of you know in this wonderful literature, is a great deal of language, the language of books, etc., when they hear stories and read stories. And they also give you a desire to read. The second stage is years and years of free voluntary reading, reading what you like. What some people call light reading, which we've all gone through. The years of light reading that you did, which typically happens in first language in high school and secondary education, lays the foundation. It's not enough to give you all of academic language, but it brings you to the point where tough academic language is now comprehensible. And then you find out what you like in specialized language, and that's where you get the specialized version that you're looking for. I'm going to give you one case history today, and it's a case history I know the best, and it's my case history. I want to go through how I did it, and I invite you, as I'm going through this, to think of yourselves. And my prediction is that all of you have gone through the same stage as I did. For you guys in your first and second languages. I'll tell you about my first language case as illustrative, and I'll make the claim that what I'm saying is deep down universal, but some of the superficial details are different. Stage one for me began in the late 1940s in the Midwest where I grew up, and I must tell you my case is an interesting one because it was so easy for me. I cannot tell you an exciting, thrilling, inspirational story of how I overcame obstacles. I didn't. I had an easy time. I don't know what happened when I was meeting with my spirit guide between lives, but my spirit guide and all my friends I've been reincarnating with decided I should get a pass on this lifetime because they really gave me an easy course, all right? I grew up middle class, gradually becoming upper middle class because of my father's business success. He was the ultimate ethical capitalist who convinced me that it is possible, okay? I know some people doubt that, but he actually did it. So I grew up with books everywhere. I grew up with family support. I also grew up with nearly the complete absence of family pathology. Mom and Dad were wonderful. No complaints. I have a sister, my older sister, and I've never understood her. She and her husband, and I grew up with him too in the same neighborhood, have always been so nice to me. And I have never understood why. I never do anything for them. And they're always doing me favors everywhere. That's how it is, older sisters. I've heard that. So when I grew up, I had mom and dad to read me stories, books everywhere. My sister read me stories. My sister got me a library card. Isn't that amazing? When I was 9 years old, she took me to the Chicago Public Library, got me a library card. So there were books everywhere. There were stories everywhere. My sister got me involved in stories on the radio. We would listen together. And I had stories in school. Very simple. My second stage, what I was fully prepared for, happened when I was in middle school, 8, 9 years old, comic books, which I've already talked about a little. I got involved with comic books because of my dad. When I was in the first grade, and the second grade also, they put me in the low reading group. Dad brought home comic books. Within weeks, I was to the middle reading group, the upper reading group. It was very dramatic. My father gave me an unlimited budget for comic books. He says, I'll pay for any comic book you want. Please, a round of applause for my father. Yes. Okay, what a guy. Okay. Now, those days, it wasn't as good as now. We're now living in the silver age of comics that began in 1961 with Marvel Comics and Stan Lee, who has done more for literacy than anyone else I can think of, except maybe R.L. Stine, Goosebumps. Anyway, the comics then were not as good as today's comics. We had Batman, Superman, etc. It was pretty good, but today's comics, wow, are they better. Those of you who don't know about, how many of you have ever been comic book readers? How many of you are still comic book readers? Good for you. What a sophisticated group. Those of you who are not, let me make some suggestions. Today's comics are very sophisticated and they're really good. Check out, the leader has been Marvel. Marvel, starting in 1961. Superheroes with problems. And the introduction of the most significant character in American literature, of course, Spider-Man. Serious personal problems, struggles, etc. I want to mention a few examples if you want to look at some, give you an idea what's involved. I'll mention DC. They've been influenced by Marvel positively. One of the most significant ones was about 20 years ago called Batman Returns. Some of you have read it, Frank Miller. Batman has come back. He's now 56 years old. He's still going out there and doing adventures. He comes back, though, he needs to take a hot bath and extra aspirin. This was before ibuprofen, okay? He no longer, the ethical discussion is very interesting. He no longer takes orders from Commissioner Gordon. He no longer waits for the bat signal. He's become Dirty Harry. His ethical standards are different from what the police are asking for. Sometimes they're the same. 10 minutes, please. Oh, 15? Okay, good. I'll finish whenever I feel. Okay, I love this job. I'll be done in time. I'll be done in time. It's okay. I just had to show off my power. Anyway, now Superman has a cameo appearance. They're still friends. And they have these meetings and they talk about ethics and what's correct. Superman is more conservative. He is in favor of law and order. The police know what's best and we're working for them. The beautiful thing is that DC does not take a position. Frank Miller does not take a position. They give you the data and the arguments, but they don't tell you which one is right. They have brought up the most significant ethical question that we face. Do we obey what we think is right when it conflicts with society's norms? Always a struggle. Marvel did this in Iron Man 2. When Iron Man has developed, Tony Stark has developed this incredible costume where he can, destroy the world if he wants to, and he uses it for good. But the U.S. government subpoenas him. He has to come to Congress. They say, this is ours, not yours. A private citizen can't have this power. He says, what do you mean? I'm doing the stuff you're supposed to do. Again, the movie doesn't take a position. Another comic that does this, a graphic novel, is The Watchmen, which became a movie, DC, from the quote of Cicero, who's watching the Watchmen? Do we want benevolent dictatorship? If we have superheroes, who's making sure they're doing the right thing? So comics today are literature. That's my opinion. They're not all equally good. There's too much violence in comics. Speaking to you as a parent and as a grandparent, again, but the genre itself is terrific. There's a lot of stuff there. After I went through comics, I still haven't gotten over comics. I still read them and love them. I went into sports stories. It was about 3 years of reading baseball novels. Yes, my favorite author was a guy named John R. Tunis, T-U-N-I-S. Turned out that Jim Trelease, one of our heroes, the Read Aloud Handbook, had the same author he read. He sent me a lot of interesting stuff about John R. Tunis. It was all about baseball, and he had a series of novels, about 13, 14 of them, about one team and the same players. Not the players of today, but fictional. The last one in the series, and whether you speak baseball or not, you'll get this. The last one, and it wasn't just about home runs and hits, and it's about the players and their problems and their struggles. The last one in the series was called World Series. It's the championship game. Everything decides on this one game. It's the end of the game. The score is tied. Those of you who speak baseball, it's the last of the ninth. The score is 4-2, bases loaded, 2 outs. Couldn't be more dramatic. The pitcher on one team is the father. The batter on the other team is the son. And they haven't spoken for 15 years. That's good writing. If you want to find out what happened, you'll have to read it yourself, all right? After that, I went to science fiction, and this was the golden age of science fiction. This was Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, all these giants of science fiction. I had plenty to read. This was my curriculum. There was assigned reading in high school, but I don't remember any of it. I can't tell you a single book or what it was about. I remember all these books that I read. I've picked up some of them years later, and they're still exciting. They're still compelling. It did not bring me to the highest level of literacy, but it put me to the point where I was ready for more demanding stuff. Now, the demanding stuff finally came in graduate school when I discovered linguistics, finally. I was starting to get close to what I really liked. And I went to grad school at UCLA and took linguistics classes. The second class I took was a class in syntactic theory, which I thought was fascinating. And the textbook was Aspects of the Theory of Syntax by Noam Chomsky. It was completely incomprehensible. It could have been written in Bulgarian. I had no idea. So I stumbled on a strategy that worked. I decided to read the complete works of Chomsky starting at the beginning, which I did. I put aspects aside. I went back to the 1950s and I read Syntactic Structures, his first monograph written for an audience with no background in his work. It was very clear. It took me about a week and a half to read the 50, 60 pages very slowly, several times, but I got it. It was really good, let me tell you. I then went to the next article by Chomsky. I read reviews of syntactic structures. I stuck to strict chronological current issues in linguistic theory. About a month later, I had worked my way back up to aspects of the theory of syntax. It was completely comprehensible. It was totally transparent. The reading I did was compelling, all of it. It was exciting. It was right for me. It may not have been right for 99.9% of the human race, but it was what I was interested. I found it wonderful. Now, I don't know Noam Chomsky. We're not pals, okay? I met him once. He was at a talk. I shook hands. I said, "I'm Steve Krashen." He said, "Who?" That was it. But Chomsky was my teacher. I owe him so much. I was reading it because I was interested in the succession. It was fascinating. But without realizing it, I learned how to think like a scientist, and I learned how to write and write scientific style. I later on did the same thing with experimental research, starting at the beginning. That's how I learned to write journal papers, having read 200-300 of them chronologically in different areas I was interested in. That's how I learned to use statistics, do statistical analyses, write up articles using statistics, etc. That's where it comes from. In all three stages, the input was compelling. In all three stages, especially 2 and 3, let's say, it was selected by me. It was self-selected and narrow. I didn't try to read everything. Everything I read was exciting to me right then at that time. This is how we develop academic language. The alternative ways. First of all, we have classes in which subjects are taught, something I helped develop, sheltered subject matter teaching, which I still think is a good idea. Making subject matter comprehensible. But classes, as helpful as they are, aren't the same. There have been statistical analysis of what goes on in classes. Doug Biber from Arizona has done some great research on this. It turns out that a lot of academic discourse in classes is conversational. It's like midway between conversational and heavy academic language, like the lecture I'm giving to you now. This is not academic language. It's part is, part isn't. So that can't give you all of it, and you can't get it by study. You can't get it by what is called English for academic purposes. The way English for academic purposes works is you first analyze the language of a discipline, and then you get lists and lists of the special vocabulary, the special grammar, the genres, the discourse style, etc. Then you teach it to people. Impossible Too complicated, too much of it, it cannot be done. The simplest example, vocabulary. Academic vocabulary, there's too much of it. Nobody could do it. The average educated native speaker of English knows, anywhere between 50,000, 150,000 words, depending on how you do the analysis. That's not 50,000 trips to the dictionary, 50,000 write 3 sentences with every word, all that stuff. It cannot be done. And you guys, bilinguals and trilinguals, your academic vocabularies are in the hundreds of thousands of words when you combine languages, et cetera. There's too much out there. We're supposed to learn academic style. I have read the work of Hyland, Flowerdew, Swales. I'll tell you what I think of it. I think it is first-class linguistics. It is not interesting for pedagogy. What it tells us is that it cannot be taught. I'm fascinated by Swales' work where he's done books and book chapters and books and article after article on the structure of abstracts in scientific papers. Boy, is it complicated. And he changes it every article because he's made new discoveries. And as you read it, you recognize, yeah, I guess that's right. I didn't really get that. You'd already acquired what he is telling you, conscious learning. Cannot be done. So my conclusion on academic language, what I've just told you, and I know you're thinking of how hard this is to do in our current academic framework, what I've just told you, I suspect, is not just a possibility, and it's not just the easy way to do it. It's the only way to do it. We have our choice. For those of you who say, yeah, but my school program won't let me do it. We have our choice, and I'm paraphrasing what Frank Smith has pointed out. We have two things in conflict. We have the brain, which you can't change. And you have school, which people tell us cannot be changed. We have to change school. We cannot change the human brain. People assume, no, let's do things contrary to the way the brain works. Cannot be done. We have no choice, in my opinion, but to do it the easy way. It's the only thing that works. Thank you very much.